So, hello Evita. Thank you very much for taking the time. This is the first call with us together, like for you to introduce yourself to the community and to tell about yourself, the type of things that you are doing, and also the type of things we plan to do in the future as well, to increase the value and to give some knowledge to the community also. First of all, I'm going to ask you like some questions about you and your experience, but then at the end, of course, we are going to open a Q&A round where you can just get questions from the crowd as well. And yeah, I would say let's just start easily, like to get to know a little bit more about you and your person. I got like this interesting question. How would you describe yourself to someone you just met at a cafe?
I love that question. So, first of all, hello, Ilya, and hello, everyone. It's an absolute honor being here with you all. And how I would introduce myself to someone at a cafe. So, after, of course, the regular, I'm Evita, and just, wondering if they're ever going to ask me what I'm doing, probably it would look something like if they ask me about, job wise, I would say I'm a poet, writer, and teacher. The three golden words that I would use would be these.
That's very nice. But right now, what's like your main thing that you are doing? Are you focusing on something mainly, or are you trying to really have the balance between all of these three things?
Oh, that's a good question. Mainly, I'm balancing the three at the moment because, well, I think I'm definitely going to be diving more into this. But at the moment, I'm teaching quite a bit. And I don't know if I mentioned this or not in my introductory post, but I also teach uh, English language arts as well as English as a second language. So I teach quite a lot, but I do make it a point to also balance my own writing with that. So I would definitely say just balancing all three is one of my main missions currently.
That's nice, and I think that's really like hard to manage. Um, how can you keep like this balance between teaching people about poetry and like writing poetry by yourself when you do this process with other people and you try to give them like the value in these topics? Are you like kind of also developing yourself and your own skills, or yeah, like are
That's
you maybe
very much so.
recognizing the mistakes you recognize by your students in your own poems? Yeah.
Actually, that's a great way of putting it because, yes, as you know, during the teaching process, is I don't kind of like switch off completely. I do switch off in terms of, trying to experiment with my own work or kind of just take it apart in my own time. Of course, I don't do any of those, but um, teaching and just talking about these things instead of just having it in my own mind and just trying it out without laying it out there in the open,
Yeah.
that really makes has made a major difference in my own writing too. And actually I do have this beautiful piece that I was reading by Ocean Vuong, who was saying that teaching had actually made him better at thinking in general. And I really get that because, when I'm writing and just writing, sometimes ideas can get intermingled a bit. And, that's okay because I'm going to figure it out later. I'm going to do something about it at some point. But, you just can't afford to do that in a classroom. You cannot do that, just you cannot go, okay, let's just mix things up a little and see what goes. So you have to kind of have this more structured and clear approach to things, be able to lay things out there more clearly in the open. So, yeah, I do love that. I do love the way teaching makes me think, in other words.
That's really nice. And when you read like poem from other people, are there any patterns you recognize from someone who just started with poetry? So you can just already see it based on the poem, on the structure, and to someone who already like advanced in it? Do you see like any patterns and any things that you can already like see, okay, this is someone who really just started out with that and someone who experienced?
As in like some writerly decisions that everyone does at a particular point in their writing journey. Did I get that right?
Um, yeah, like if you can recognize based on a poem how far someone is with poetry, like the poetry level, the level of a
Mhm.
poet, how far he is, and yeah.
I love that question. I would say yes sometimes, but no. And mostly in terms of, yes, I always ask to have at least, one poem before getting started with a course because that does give me an idea of, what avenues we can explore. And not just in terms of, what this particular writer can do more of, but also in terms of what this particular writer is interested in. So yeah, I do always ask for a sample, and to some extent, yes, I do get some ideas as to, you know, what directions we could be taking to address what in their work. But I believe that is, I always balance that with also keeping a very open mind in terms of, because yes, a particular approach to a particular form in a poem could say a bit about the
Mhm.
writerly decisions a person's making, but also it is possible that that poem is an experiment in something. It's
Yeah.
also possible that that poem was written at a particular time in response to a particular situation. So I also just make sure that I'm keeping an open mind because one thing that I love about teaching poetry is that people are always surprising me with their work. So yeah, so to put it shortly, yes and no. And I kind of love that no part because it allows for all this exploration to take place.
That's very nice. Yeah, I understand you completely. And when you work with someone, do you try almost like to work based on the goals the person has with poetry, or do you also try to kind of like, I don't know, give them some ideas or what's like the best way for him to go with with this type of things he's writing right now and with the type of structure and the type of ideas he has, or like what's your process with developing this character?
Yeah, I understand your question. Again, it's both. In terms of goals, one thing that I always believe in, well, one thing I don't believe in when it comes to a poetry course is, just having this rigid framework and syllabus that you just kind of stamp on everyone to say, okay, we're going to start with this and this and this and this, and then we're going to wrap up with this, and then I don't believe in that at all. So I always make sure that everything is tailor made, of course, to a student's, especially in terms of especially if the session is one on one. I make sure that it's tailor made. If it's not a one on one session, I make sure the feedback is tailor made
Hmm.
because everybody has their own process. So, yes, personal goals are also important. If, for example, let's say one individual is deeply invested in writing humor poetry, and I kind of force them into a very serious incorporation of evocative defamiliarization, that's just going to clash so much with their own goals that it's
Yeah.
possible, they're never going to, their journey is not going to be what they really set out for it to be. So, of course, I could, talk in terms of some suggestions. I can see you doing a lot of this. Would you
Yeah.
like to explore this further? But yeah, ultimately, I just make sure that I'm mainly supporting and serving as a guide and not as an enforcer of a particular direction,
Yeah.
um, if that makes sense. Yeah.
That totally makes sense, definitely. And I think one of like the most questions or like problems I saw in the community when people join, they're sometimes like afraid to post their poetry with this excuse of I don't know the rules, how to write, and my poem is not like written by the rules of poetry or something like this, but Like, what's your opinion on this? Do you think poetry or like this art of poetry has any kind of rules, and also how you act on it on them, or like how you use them in your daily work with people? Do you set up any rules in this kind of way, or how don't you like limit the person in your writing with this kind of rules that maybe exist, you know?
Hmm. I get that. Well, I'm going to start with one sentence and then I'm going to dive deeper into that.
Yeah.
I love the sentence, rules are meant to be broken. I'm not talking anarchy. We're talking poetry. But in terms of poetry, I do believe that too. But so I'm going to start, ordering my answer in the way you ordered your question. As to posting a poem, there's not necessarily been written based on some rules, the rules of poetry. I would say I would see zero problems with that. Because in a community, people love to share work, whether it's been written according to very strict rules or whether it's been written according to the person's own readings. To a certain extent, our writing is deeply inspired by our readings too. So any poem that we are creating is different, percentages of experimentation, the stuff we've read, the stuff we've lived through. So in terms of sharing stuff in a community, I love seeing work that's, you know, not been written according to any rules, and I love seeing work that's been written according to strict rules, because in any case, I believe they have a lot to offer, both kinds of work and anything in between. In terms of the classes, of course, the people I work with the poets I work with may opt for different degrees of, strict learning when it comes to rules. Like I would never, just dive into, I don't know, iambic pentameter, without kind of talking to the person in question, just, really making sure that that is what they are aiming to learn,
Yeah.
actually. And in general, whenever we do talk about rules, and we do that, yes, we talk about techniques, we talk about some rules, but we always do that in terms of let's learn them so that we can break them. It's kind of like,
Yeah.
the mold,
Yeah.
and then you break it to make it even more, to make a point, to make a particular point, to get it across. So yes, even when we talk about, the sonnet form and, what you have to do with the rhymes and the rhyme patterns, etc., you would never ever see me, kind of go, hey, why didn't you follow this rhyme pattern to the T? You would never see that,
Yeah.
because rules are meant to be broken, and that's how we get to new ground, we explore new stuff.
Yeah. I got that. I also agree with that. This is great. Yeah. This is also something very like sensible. Yeah. Like to find this type of thing. Yeah. To like give the right information to the person. Just not like don't limit them with this kind of rules that existing. And I think it's really hard. So you're doing a great job when you describe it like this. Um, during your like experience and going through this process to become the person you are today, like poetry teacher and all of the stuff you studied before, have the other like any kind of things you will done differently?
Hmm. Anything that I would have done differently? Well, you know that I started as a musician.
Yeah.
So, yes, even though my years as a musician did ultimately, help my poetry too, I would have, started with the English literature sooner. But after I started, very much zooming into poetry and learning it, um, from that point onward, no, I would have submitted more. That's something I would always have done more of. The reason I haven't done that is usually, life gets in the way, or, I just don't have enough time to, hit that submit button, or, check that formatting or check this guideline. I guess one thing that I would always, like at any given point in time, love to have done more of is to submit more, because that means, of course, not, just submitting haphazardly,
Yeah.
no, but, submitting wisely, but also just doing more of that, because every submission is another opportunity. So why not? So yeah, I would have done more of that.
You can always do more. That's right. Absolutely right. And were there like any moment in your childhood where you knew that you were going to become like a writer or a poet? What was like the first interaction with that amazing things?
You mean as a child? When was the first time I kind of went, I want
Um,
to be a poet? Like
not
that?
not not necessarily as a child, but like this is right now the main thing you are doing, and where was like the first interaction with that? Because maybe many people think this was something from the childhood. If it's right, then yeah, that's the case. But if not, that like explain us the right experience you got, like in what age and stuff.
I hear you. I hear you. Well, it all started with a little poetry book.
Yeah,
It was called Shakespeare on Love, that my parents got me. And I remember that, they were a bit tentative. They weren't sure if, I was going to engage with it at all, because I was about 10 to 11. And I'd been reading lots of stories until then. So I did love books, but I'd never really, done any poetry up until that point. And so this was like a really reader-friendly book, a compilation of everything super emotional and beautiful that Shakespeare has ever written on love.
yeah.
And I just remember I kind of opened it, and the first page was, Juliet's "If he should die, take him and cut him up into little stars." Um, and and I just remember, something. I couldn't get all of it, of course. It took me years to actually figure out how to read Shakespeare. But I just remember, this something, starting to tickle, where, wow, you can actually think like this. You can actually think of, a person as stars, and just
Mm,
outshining the sun, and
yeah,
a person expressing love in that way, instead of just going, I love you, and just going, oh no, if you take him and if you like cut him into bits and pieces of little stars, he will outshine the sun itself. um and so I guess that's when it really started, because after that I kind of started reading more poetry. I started with love poetry, of course.
yeah.
And then yeah, I guess you could trace it all back
So you
to
just
that.
kind of understood like the other ways to express yourself, and that was the first kind of like this great experience with that. Okay, I got it. Would it be wrong to say that Shakespeare is like your favorite author, or is there someone else?
Oh yes. Oh yes, that would be very accurate. He's not my only favorite one, but he's definitely my like number one. Yes.
And do you have any number two or three
Yes, I
names?
do. Not in any particular order, but definitely I love Yeats. Wow, Dante's really good, but honestly, he's a little bit of a scary figure for me still, confession, because I've mostly deep dived into more modernist works like um well, he's not a favorite, but T.S. Eliot has his moments of just, wowing me. But, I'm a big Yeats fan. And in terms of like more contemporary poets, I kind of used him a bit earlier. Ocean Vuong is mind blowing for me. Ada Limon, Ocean Vuong, yeah. Fran Locke, I love her work too. So
That's really nice. And besides the authors, like for example Shakespeare, because I think you read like a lot of its books, but besides that, any maybe like music or films or movies like that got you forward or like inspired you a lot, because like in my case, Dead Poet Society inspired me to create a Live Poet Society. So that's like what kind of my story is. But yeah, just tell us a little bit about this as well.
Mhm. I'm gonna steal your idea, actually, Ilya.
Yeah.
Because particularly in the Dead Poet Society, one scene that, kind of acted as that little bell
Mm.
was, just jumping on that desk and, seeing everything from a different perspective, because that is what I think, poetry really makes us do most of the time. It just really makes us see things from a different point of view. If we're reading somebody else's work, if, we're writing our own work and just, exploring ideas from. So I'm going to steal your idea there, and I'm going to go with that desk scene.
Yeah.
And, just being, I think it's one of this is a very personal opinion, of course, but it's one of the bravest things that I myself have ever had to do, to see things from a different point of view. And I honestly don't think that that's just, limited to poetry either. Even when it comes to like writing prose fiction too, just being able to kind of shift your perspective to see, how each character sees their world, what everything looks like for them. So yeah, I would say that.
Yeah, love that. Definitely. You can steal this idea, because I think this movie inspired so many people that this is just great. For me, like this was this scene where the boy kills himself, and like you can decide either like you go to your passion, you follow your passion, and you get hate from your parents or from people like maybe that you live together, or you just die. So what's the better option? Of course, the first one. And that was kind of like very motivating for me as well. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And do you like more like positive poetry with positive emotions? Or are you someone who enjoys more to read something more deep or more sad?
Oh, good one, good
Yeah.
one. Honestly, I make a point of reading everything, and I kind of always do automatically because, as you know, I also contribute as an editorial reader. So, I get many different kinds of poems that I have to review, and I have to make sure that, I'm as objective as possible about them. I'm not kind of um, displaying any kind of a prejudice based on whether they're more lighthearted or more kind of somber. So honestly, I try to make sure it's all a mix.
Yeah,
My reading experience is a mix of everything.
I got it. Yes, also like the option number C for Dr. Bertman, I see in the comments, violence, violence poetry.
That's
Yeah.
cool.
Do you like violence poetry?
Well, depends on the violence, honestly. I guess one question I always ask myself is, specifically in terms of, if it's, graphic content, which of course I do also encounter quite a bit. Especially again as an editorial reader, I can't just, say, "Oh God, no, some gore. I cannot read this." So that is not an
Yeah.
option. And I guess one question that I always ask myself is it necessary? Or is it just there for the shock value?
Mhm.
If it's, just, gore just for the sake of shock value, then I guess no, it's not kind of my cup of tea, personally. But, if it's doing something for the poem, if it's required, if it's there for a particular purpose, it's serving a purpose, then yeah, I'm open-minded to exploring what it's doing and why it's
Yeah,
necessary.
that's great. Yeah, I got it. And you told us that you get a lot of poems like to review them. Do you have any specific process that you follow during this reviewing? Like, how do you start? How do you finish this process? Because as many people already know that you are going to be someone in the future who also does it for this community. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. But what's like your process on that? And yeah, how you like optimize it? Maybe. Yeah.
Mhm. I hear you. Uh, First things first, one of my most important rules is I do not do it if I'm exhausted. I do not do it if I'm not in the right mood. So I kind of make sure that, right from the get-go, each and every piece has an equal chance of getting my full attention. So that's the first thing. Because we're all human, and it's possible that the same poem that I'm going to really like when I'm feeling super
Mhm.
amazing is going to be the poem that I don't really go for if I'm feeling really down. So I just make a point of timing my readings well. And while I'm reading, again, I guess one important thing for me is always to just make sure I'm keeping an open mind. It just using a mold and just expecting that that writing is just going to fit into the mold, and then kind of just going, oh, it didn't,
Mm.
and judging it because it didn't fit a preset framework of expectations. I That's not something that I want to bring to the table. And I guess I'm open for all kinds of experimentations. I'm open for all kinds of, treatments of language. And I just look to see what that writer, that poet has done with those writerly decisions. So I mainly just look to see, is it convincing? Not just convincing me as a person emotionally, but also, is it consistent? Is this writerly decision warranted? Is it consistent? Is it a conscious decision? Does it look like it's serving a purpose? Is it delivering what it's set out, what it's promised to deliver? And I guess these are questions that I ask instead of, is it meeting my own expectations? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
This is I just yeah understood it because it's very hard. Like the next question I have for you is like, do you shut down your emotions when you start a new poem because you can understand it on a different way when you feel happy or when you feel sad, like just you as a person. So how you like manage these feelings?
That's interesting. First of all, no, honestly, not. When it comes to emotion,
Yeah,
honestly, it's one of the main things that personally I love to look for in a poem.
yeah,
And actually, this was one of my key takeaways from one of the assignments that I submitted for, when I was studying creative writing, where I distinctly remember that I did this, big analysis of Susan Howe's work and Natalie Diaz's work. And like I did a very systematic analysis. I wrote God knows how many words. And I remember that my professor highlighted this one little paragraph in the middle, and he went, "This is what I was looking for." And that was where I was talking about emotions. I was talking about what emotions all of this analysis was trying to get at. And I distinctly remember that he highlighted that. And that's the only reason I got a good mark because I targeted that. And and I agree with him. It's ultimately what we are looking for most of the time. Something that talks to us, resonates with us, and so I don't shut down my emotions. I definitely don't do that. But yeah, apart from making sure that I'm in the right mood, not necessarily happy, but in the right mood,
yeah,
not at 4 a.m. in the morning, barely awake or anything.
yeah,
But also I just make sure that I'm kind of doing everything I can to get at what that poem is communicating. Like are there images that the poet has used to evoke a particular emotion? And, I usually get some kind of an emotion, and I make a point of, getting at, okay, what really got me feeling like this, and what writerly decisions are evoking this.
Yeah.
So, not at all. I very much try to make sure that, I'm responsive emotionally. I just don't want to kind of stamp my own emotions on people's work. I just want to be super responsive to what poets have done in their work.
I got it, and I think that's actually like the right way to think about it. Before we going like to the chat and the questions to the chat and also the Q&A round with the people, last question I got for you, like you got through this process of studying poetry, you got through a lot of poetry teachers and like yeah, lectures and all this stuff. Are there any things you recognize like in the university, for example, or like any methods to teach this kind of topic that you completely disagree with, that you don't use in your personal teaching process?
I love that question. To be honest, I've been really lucky in terms of having received exactly the education that I needed
Mm,
at any point in time.
yeah.
What I mean by this is, when I was getting started with poetry, I took a course. I didn't know a lot about, what I was going to get from the course, but I just signed up for it because I knew I had to dive in somehow.
Yeah.
So, I just signed up for it. And it turned out to be, a very back to the basics kind of an approach where, we wrote sonnets and villanelles and sestinas and, really talked about meter, managing that, manipulating that, rhymes. And so, I had this very focused kind of like a course to begin with where, I kind of learned all the rules, like we talked about them. I'm using the word from before, as well as, some ways of breaking them. But I do remember that at the time I was really constrained within those frameworks. So, if I was asked to write a sonnet, I was going to write a sonnet. Like if I was asked to write a Shakespearean sonnet, I was going to write a Shakespearean sonnet,
Yeah.
if only to kind of show that I could. And then, after that course, I was again lucky enough to, start working with mentors who were kind of right from the get-go just encouraging me to break free now. So instead of just, enforcing more rules and going like, hey, how about you learn the pontoon as well and try to learn a couple more forms and a couple of more, they were like, just break some rules, see what you can do with these, see how you can experiment, and see how you can find a voice that's all your own and not, you trying to be, super good
Yeah.
at following frameworks. And I did get that. I was, as I mentioned, I've been really lucky. And I'm so lucky that I can say I do not disagree with any of the methods that my creative writing instructors and mentors have used, because they've always, been able to give me exactly what I needed at that point in time. This is about creative writing, of course. And again, that's why I always make sure that, any course I come to, at different points in the course, I always make sure that, I'm staying in contact with the student, because I want to make sure that I'm doing this, or at least, doing my best to do the same thing for people,
Yeah.
not offering something that I think is best, but, just offering something that is needed at that point in time.
As Dr. Bertman said in the chat, you can only teach others, teach another how to think. Yeah, that's right. And
Beautiful.
I see some more messages from you, Dr. Bertman. If you want to unmute yourself and ask some of this question, like personally, we can just open this Q&A round right now, and you can just talk to Evita directly.
Well, first of all, what gets you up in the morning?
That's a good question. Honestly, I would say poetry, but the first thing that really gets me up is the people that I love, plus my pets. Honestly, like this is the most honest question that I can give you. But after that, after the people and my two pets, it's poetry. It's the work that I do.
Amazing.
So you love your work, and you do not see yourself getting bored of it at all.
Oh gosh, yes, I do. Yes, I do. But I do find myself, regularly, sometimes, definitely, just struggling with the writing, as I'm sure, I don't know about many people here, but sometimes, it's a blank page. You're struggling to fill it up. You're struggling to, or maybe you filled it up, but you're struggling to give it some kind of a structure. But I think that I sometimes take breaks when I'm feeling like that and just read. I read as a writer. I love doing that. So I do that actually. I just kind of take a step back. And, okay, Evita, this is not a writing day for you, but okay, we just need to read.
Yeah, well, reading can enhance your ability to think of your own way, to start executing what is in
So
your head, gathering your own thoughts, falling back and gathering your troops.
I agree.
That's right. Absolutely. And we got another question in the chat from Zainab. She unfortunately left us, but to get it on the recording as well, may I know what makes usage of violence in poetry necessary for you?
Mhm. That's a really good question. I can only answer in terms of some examples because, it's always possible somebody will come up with another scenario. But for example, sometimes in order to talk against something, you have to first show what it is. And so, of course, it makes for a very harrowing poetry. But sometimes you just have to do that if you really want to critique something. You can't, for example, you can't just go, I'm talking against violence. Maybe you need to enact a little bit of violence or a lot of violence to ultimately be able to really critique it.
Well, linguistic violence stops us from committing physical violence.
We got
I love that.
we got an expert in violence here with us.
It is helpful to express these, well, it helps with the deconstruction of an idea that you are trying to attack.
Yes, I definitely agree with that. Yes, it's not always, just a clear-cut way of just saying what you want to say and just getting done with it, as you said. And I do think that, violence, you mentioned violence in language, and there are lots of ways of understanding that too. Is this, violent imagery, like visceral imagery, or is it like violence against language itself, where, I'm being syntactically, erratic, or just breaking all my sentences, that's also one way of showing violence.
Yeah,
I
go
may not
for it.
even use I may not even use the word blood in my poem, but I may be super violent with the way I'm using syntax. So I guess yes, there are of course many different ways of approaching violence in the first place, but also many different means towards which we could use that for sure.
What would you say is the best way for you to create contrast between the ideas that you are trying to put out there and the ones that are conflicted with it or with them?
That's a beautiful question. Personally, and again, I always use this personally because there's always going to be so many different approaches to something, but I tend to use several techniques, or a mix of them. So either it's imagery that clash with each other, semantic fields that, again, clash radically with one another. Or I sometimes love to play around with layout, where, I would use a more creative layout and just kind of have the poem visually be in some kind of a tension with itself. Alternatively, again, just contrasting between a more stable syntax and a more erratic syntax, contrasting between end stopped lines and, lines that seem to run over all the time and kind of disorient the reader. So I guess I would just use, one or all, a mix of these techniques just to kind of really communicate that contrast. Of course, another thing to opt for would be to just go with irony, just, give the reader enough clues to figure out that everything you're saying is actually ironic, which is, something that needs to be, well handled, making sure you communicate that. But you could just go with irony, just saying one thing throughout the poem, but, giving those little clues so that people figure out that, you're saying the exact opposite thing.
As in embodying the voice of the other party, but in a self-condemning way, giving their voice and awareness that they did not have.
Could you say that one more time, just to make sure I got you right?
Giving the voice of the other party a awareness through your own irony of, like, when you talk about it, you talk from their perspective, but give it the awareness that you have of the falsehoods of their perspective.
Definitely right. There's always this implied author where, the reader kind of there is this speaker in every poem, and then there is the implied author. And these two don't have to be the same all the time. It could be a speaker that's very different from the implied author. And these two can definitely clash with one another. And I think that really makes for really interesting poetry for the readers too, where they go, ha ha ha, what's happening?
Have you tried to do this? But both parties are your own head. So self-reflection through poetry. So you talk to yourself, perhaps a voice, and then a voice that says, don't do drugs. The other voice is like, well, I do them because I want to die, and, etc.
Yes, I do that. I actually do that. And one form that, I really love is the dramatic monologue, where, sometimes I just choose this character or this, speaker who is radically different from me, or, who is, the embodiment of, one hidden part of me. And then I kind
Or mother figure, father figure type thing.
Yeah, I do love doing that. And I do love dramatic monologues. So yeah. Not that, you necessarily have to do it as a dramatic monologue, but, I do have a knack for them. So I sometimes do that. Yeah.
Do you find it easy to contrast inferiority and superiority in imagery without creating an insulting pattern?
That's a really good question.
All my questions are good. I
I
have many.
see. I think, oh, no. It's a really good one. I think it's an infinitely difficult thing to do. And to speak, to give you one example, I wrote a poem that, I was adamant on including in my final dissertation. And it was the speaker of the poem was the Shah in Scheherazad's story. And, of course, he was never going to go out and, explicitly condemn himself. He was never going to do that. If I did that, then it wouldn't be him talking. And so, I ultimately sought a lot of feedback on that, from the forums, from my professor, from the writers group that I was a part of. And I guess interestingly, what I finally came up with was more visceral imagery as a means of making sure that I wasn't romanticizing this relationship. Because initially I had avoided more visceral images. And the result of all of that, for me too, was that the Shah seemed to be, you know, romanticizing his relationship with Scheherazade. And the implied author's voice wasn't, you know, as strong so as to, you know, kind of push through. And I do remember, you know, people liking the poem, but kind of going, ah. So I edited that poem a lot. And interestingly, it was yet another instance of where violence was necessary in terms of, you know, more visceral imagery, so that, you know, finally, you know, the horror of the situation, how horrific this relationship is, would finally seep through, would finally come across, instead of the more romanticized version of, oh, Scheherazade saves herself by telling stories, you know? So I think it's an
Speaking of,
infinitely difficult process, in need of a lot of feedback from people who are out of your own head, who can react to the poem as, you know, readers, purely as readers.
yeah. Well, speaking of romanticization, my God, I can't talk no more. Romanticization, fuck me. You get
Romanticization. Uh-huh.
romanticization of the thing, yeah. See, when it comes to positivity and negativity, they are subjective after all, right? So, how would you say or like manage the positivity or negativity of a point of view? Perhaps, say, a suicidal person would write about death in a way that is positive, whereas you would see it as negative as a reader. But like, how can you, while you write that, for an example, make the reader feel what you feel, a positive
Mm.
idea of the negative thing?
I hear you. I think what we have entered here is more the territory of reader reception, where, to give a very extreme example of where we're going, there is a text by Stanley Fish who goes, "Is there a text in this class?" And the anecdote behind it is that a student goes to him and asks him if her reading, her interpretation of a text is correct, as in what the writer intended. And Fish goes, "Is there a text in this class?" Because his theory, arguably his extreme theory, is that every reader reconstructs the text that they are reading. And, you know, at some point, the author relinquishes control and just welcomes interpretations. Now, of course, you know, I wouldn't go, you know, as far as to say all the control belongs to the reader, because as many critics have pointed out, it's the writer who ultimately chooses the words, chooses the letters to kind of create the text. So there is some control on the poet's part. And yes, that can come through as, you know, different techniques, rhymes, I don't know, music, not necessarily rhymes, but, you know, the
Speaking of
music
the
that
word
you use.
choices, speaking of the word choices, as you just said, yeah, how would you use that to gain fame through notoriety? Oh my God, I can't talk no more. Notoriety. Oh my God, English. Notorious.
Right, it's a weird word.
Notoriety. Basically, like Andrew Tate, you see, he uses language in such an evocative way that even if he does not intend to say what we hear, he makes us hear, intentionally makes us hear the thing that would make him notorious and, well, gain power through that.
Mhm.
How would you do that?
Honestly, as in how I would use, what techniques I would use in my poem to kind of build that kind of an effect on the reader. Did I get that right?
Yeah, how can you misguide the reader while still like have the text in itself be good, for an example, like have it flawlessly, um, not something that can be misinterpreted, yet at the same time misguide the reader through your word choice into thinking the exact opposite.
That question. Honestly, and I know this will be a point of view that, you know, many disagree with, but I don't really try to direct the reader that much. This is a personal choice, honestly. It's one of the reasons why I love Shakespeare so much. If you read like the texts of some or most of his contemporaries, you see all these, prefaces and introductions and manifestos, and I intended this, I wanted this, you have to read my work like this, you have to interpret it like this. But one thing that I really love about Shakespeare is that zero. He's just, not interested in, giving that interpretation any final direction. Yes, he uses images that, charge his characters with particular emotions. Of course, we feel bad for, I don't know, for example, of course, we feel bad for King Lear when he's losing his mind out there in the Tempest. But even at that point, he doesn't force any audience member to completely feel sorry for Lear or to completely condemn Lear's actions against Cordelia. He allows audience members to feel this, that, a mix, both, come up with their own ideas. And in many ways, of course, I don't want to compare myself to Shakespeare. I don't think that's a fair comparison at all. But in many ways, I love it when I see people have interpreted my work in different ways. Yes, in terms of the example I used regarding Scheherazade, I didn't want that romanticization there because it would have been a very nefarious kind of reading of the poem for the Shah to actually, for the poem to actually praise or celebrate what had been done to all the Shah's previous wives. So, of course, in that situation, yes, it does matter to me that, I guide the reader enough to make sure that their interpretation isn't going to, be something that I'm against ethically, such as violence or domestic violence, etc. But when it comes to, for example, whether, if a poem is talking about this winter scene, whether, winter landscape, whether it's a positive or a negative or happy, sad, I'm always open to learning more about my own poems from my readers, So even if I, was like, for me, this is a very sad moment, I want to describe that. But a reader comes up to me and says, I kind of found a little bit of hope in your description of the sunlight reflected in the window. I go, hey, that's really cool. Even though that may not have been my initial intention.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Did I answer your question in terms
It
of...
does, but you kind of anyway. The question really is more so about the linguistic and artistic merit behind the ability to write something flawlessly, not in a way that is not misunderstandable, yet misguide the reader into completely misunderstanding it through the emotional wording.
I guess my main question is regarding the word misguide. It implies we want to trick the reader into something. And I guess
We
my
want
question is...
we want to write something that is good, and you can't misunderstand it in itself, the piece, right? Yet with the wording, the choice of the wording, we make it in such a way that the reader will be charged with such emotions that they will completely miss the message of the poem and misunderstand it, regardless of the fact that it is hard to misunderstand because it's clear. Like linguistically, it's clear, but using the emotional factor, you just misguide them completely into making you famous through notoriety.
Idea. Honestly, I've never experimented with that, with specifically trying to deliberately make a reader miss the point. I've done the opposite of kind of trying to help them get the point, or the points, whatever they may end up interpreting, despite, a more oblique means of expression. But I've never done that experiment. And I guess my main interest and, the thing I would be really intrigued about is to
Oh no. No, at the best moment.
Uh, the
You're
internet
back.
froze.
You're back.
Am I back?
Yeah, you're
I was
back.
frozen? Yeah. So what I was saying is I haven't done an experiment like that, but what I'm really intrigued about now is to take a look at a draft of this poem that, I'm assuming this is a draft that you're working with
No,
to
I
see.
finished them. I wrote such things,
Yeah,
particularly
yeah,
my last things, misogyny, just
yeah. And I would
and
love
you
to do that, just take a look at, um, the poem that is the embodiment of the theory that we've been discussing, to see how I respond to it as a reader first of all, and to kind of discuss based on that particular poem, because I think I would be able to kind of give more
grasp
if I could
the
respond as a reader
derivative.
first myself, instead of more abstract discussions regarding
Yeah,
readers interpretation.
makes sense. Yeah. Well, it's clear you have not read the 48 Laws of Power, and yeah,
Is it in the community? Let me
I
know
think
and I will read it.
it
It's the
is.
48 lines of power, you said?
No, I'm talking about the 48 Laws of Power as the book. You actually
Yeah.
have not heard of it.
I haven't read it. Do please pop me, a reference to it in the chat, because I am always looking for new things to read and explore. So,
I can
This is
provide
like,
you with a
yeah.
pirated or an Amazon one, whatever you want. Anyway, uh, Hemingway. Have you read Hemingway?
mhm.
What's your
Yeah,
favorite piece of
you might
Hemingway?
have read. Go on.
What is your favorite piece by Hemingway and why?
You won't believe this, but it's Cat in the Rain. I know.
Explain
I
yourself.
know.
Explain this crime.
I know. Honestly, it's not because of the cat only, although very subjectively that's a part of it. But that and the Hills Like White Elephants, I think those two really got me better as a poet too, in terms of talking about relationship dynamics and how much a single sentence, half sentence word can communicate,
Exactly.
and how much more clearly it can communicate instead of paragraphs and paragraphs of words. So okay, I know it's unusual, but those two are the ones that
Regardless of this choice, you are using Hemingway as well. He is that's basically the main lesson in all of his work. The way he uses conversational tones in the way you know, as you said, helps you with the poetry and understanding each voice.
Mhm. I think that it really helps, and plus his iceberg theory, and I think in many ways his iceberg theories for he kind of talks about that in terms of stories, short stories, but as poets I think we definitely relate to that.
Yes,
We
we can
do
use it.
all this
They can
research,
work on
we think of all this stories, either it's our own stories or a character stories or the speaker's background, and we think of so much in order to write so little that will communicate all of that so much. So I think I'm really glad that you mentioned Hemingway, actually, because I hadn't really thought about him in terms of today's conversation. But yes, I think he's definitely a really good resource for poets too.
I especially used his technique with the, just sitting outside and looking, observing people and how they move, how they talk. You just observe from far away and you notice things. These help you construct your poetry. You see, while you're observing things, you can think of them in imagery, think of things that are being done in front of you in different ways and different voices.
I agree. Actually, that's the whole point of a writer's notebook. You know, if you're interested in that kind of thing, maybe you're already keeping it based on what you said, to just, have a little notebook that's all yours and that you just carry around with you and that you load up with everything
I have my
in
skull.
here.
Yeah.
Well, I have a physical notebook, to be honest. This plus my dogs. And yes, this is Dobby. But yeah, because sometimes I don't remember. But yeah, and that's the whole point of that, because yes, you're absolutely right. We gather stuff, like it or not, and we just need to use that. And you did talk to me about, those days when things are slow, when things are just not progressing. And one more thing that gets you out of bed sometimes is, just to take a look at that little, well, for me, because I actually write in a physical notebook, but for you record it. But anyway, it's that thing that, I so wanted to write about that. I saw something, I experienced it, I have this image, I want to write about it.
Yeah, it wasn't me though. I never have slow days or slow inspiration. I
Well, I
don't.
mean, like this may be like because of the question, what gets you out of bed? I think you asked that.
Yeah. And honestly, about me, I do have slow days. So,
Yeah.
definitely, yeah, I'm not making any assumptions about you, of course.
No, no,
Everybody's
no
got their
problem.
own
Anyway,
journey. But for
would you
me,
like to talk
yeah.
about Hemingway's iceberg more? Because there is much to explore there in terms of what we can use as poets.
Go on. What's on your mind?
Go ahead. You're the expert. You're the teacher. This is not
In
about
terms
what I
of
think,
the
about you and what you think.
Okay, so the reason why I mentioned it, I can go there,
Mm-hmm.
is because, as you know, according to Hemingway, the whole grace of an iceberg is that the tip of the iceberg is out of the water and the rest of it is under. And if we kind of write the whole iceberg into the story, according to him, or the poem, whatever, what we do end up with is too much, too many revelations, too much for the reader to. But what we are really aiming for is to have just the right words. As you would agree, maybe poetry is a very condensed format. So
Exactly.
every word counts. And what we are really aiming for is for the exact right words that will have the best chance at exploring the full iceberg without the need to actually write all of it, which for me is also one of the most important things when it comes to show, don't tell. That's exactly the thing we're looking for. Enough to show, not to tell. Because the moment we do that, if you put the whole iceberg on display, you kind of destroy the mystery that the poem was supposed to contain for your reader. And that also links to what I was saying. Again, this is my personal opinion. It links back to what I was saying about how I love the fact that, my readers come to me with different interpretations, because that shows that I didn't tell them, like I
Yeah.
showed them enough for them to have some ideas, some interpretations, but I didn't tell them. And so I didn't police their interpretations and force this one idea on them, like that full iceberg,
Yeah.
Yeah.
If that makes
Well,
sense. Yeah.
let's just rewind back to Dante. Yeah. His long and dark poetry. Why haven't you gotten into detail about it? Like in your life, not in the call.
Honestly, because I've been more busy with my particular areas of interest have always been early modern English poetry and modernist poetry. And so, yes, I've done some explorations, but in terms of specific zooming in, I've always zoomed in on either side of that. So for my own writing specifically, when it comes to, reading as a writer, contemporary poets have always been my go-to.
I see.
In terms of, analyzing older texts, etc., early modern English poetry has always been a passion of mine. So, whatever degree I've done, the English literature or whatever, I've always dived more into those. Honestly, it's just a personal preference, not something I hold against Dante. It's just a personal preference. Plus, in terms of reading as a writer, again, I've always dived deeper into contemporary poets to see what they're doing with it now.
Yeah.
To see, how they're using what now. If somebody's using the sonnet form, I want to know how they are doing it now. If somebody's, using, I don't know, the sestina, again, I want to know how they are doing it at the moment. Same goes with rhymes. Same goes with alliteration. Again, this is my approach. So, many people focus on Dante, Milton. It's up to you. Honestly, it's up to each individual. But I guess if we're talking only as writers, we're also talking about what inspires us the most.
Yeah.
Which also ties back to what I was saying about my approach to teaching, where, I don't force texts on people. Like, I love Shakespeare, but you will never see me forcing it.
So you basically try to do, as I said, teach people how to think in the right frame of mind, and you let the rest just go because you can't really teach them anything other than that. Like, no one can teach anyone anything other than how to think. How about, you haven't even gotten into The New Life by Dante? I mean, it's love
I
story,
want to
basically.
double back. Honestly, when it comes to Dante, no, I haven't deep dived into his work. No. But in terms of how to think, I honestly don't think that is necessarily what I teach. And I don't necessarily think that is the only thing that I teach. So I think we need to dive a little bit deeper into that. What do I mean by this? When we dive into, meter in English poetry, that's not me teaching how to think, right? That is a very basic explanation regarding how particular patterns work, right? And at the end of it all,
to conclude them.
can you say that again?
You teach the patterns themselves, not how to
At that point in time, yes, right?
Yeah.
So I don't necessarily agree that, to think is all we teach. I love the sentiment behind it, but I don't think that is true necessarily. When I teach the patterns, for example, and I'm done with them, and I show all the different things we can do with them today, right? I'm not necessarily, and the poet in question goes home and concocts their own response to everything I've talked about. I haven't necessarily changed the way they think. That's not necessarily something I've done.
Yeah.
For example, if they thought that metrical patterns are boring, it's absolutely possible that they still think the same thing, right? And what I was saying is, based on, yes, personal approaches, personal interests, what yada yada yada, I just make sure that I'm giving these tools to people and leaving it up to them to decide what they do with it, and then providing the feedback they need after they've used one or two or all of these tools, if that makes sense.
Makes sense, yes. You said something about you studying music before diving to all of this rabbit hole, yeah? So, do you ever write lyrics or teach how to write lyrics, perhaps even how to sing them?
That's a very good question. I wouldn't presume to know how to teach lyrics because I was a classical violinist. So I wasn't a singer, I wasn't a songwriter. So I wouldn't really presume to teach people how to write lyrics.
But you are a
That
poet,
said,
you have linguistic skill, you can, theoretically speaking,
that's where I'm
blunt,
going.
fluently, just
Yeah.
fluently teach lyricality.
You're right. And that's where I was going with this. So, yes, I don't teach people because I believe when you announce that you are teaching something, you're also announcing that, you have a strong foundation in that. So, while I can teach, I don't know, defamiliarization in poetry, I don't teach songwriting because I wouldn't presume to, have the necessary qualifications to do that. However, one thing that you would see in my class is this open space for people to just come and say, hey, I love this song and, I want to explore this. And one session that I remember distinctly was one student who came and said, I really love this song, but I'm worried if I say it, you're going to judge me. And I was like, no, I think by now you know that as a teacher, I do not judge. I'm just not a very judgmental kind of person. And she went, well, I really love, the We're Far from the Shallow Now, Lady Gaga and Bradley Cooper. And that's what we focused on the whole session. And I'm open to that because yes, on some level, lyrics are poems. So, if that is an area of interest, and if I see that, the lyrics to this song is going to work better in explaining this idea than, for example, I don't know, Shakespeare's sonnet, then yes, you definitely will not see me enforcing Shakespeare because ultimately what I'm really aiming to do is to teach poetry and creative writing, not English literature.
Yeah.
So, if somebody doesn't really relate to Shakespeare, I love the guy, but if somebody doesn't relate to Shakespeare, that's fine. We can do lyrics
I
instead.
think Rhea got the
I
question.
have a request though before
Dr.
you end
Bergman,
it.
real quick, let's just give Rhea a lot of some space to ask questions as well. Rhea,
Yeah.
do you have something for Evita? You can also feel free to use the chat if you want to. You can wait.
While she types that out, yeah, I was going to request, yeah, violin maybe for the end, a little 32. No
I do not
violin?
play anymore. Sorry.
Sure.
Oh,
I moved away, just closed the violin after my recital and just dived into English literature and poetry. Sorry.
yeah.
I would have definitely done it, but just not an option. But I do have a request for you, actually, Dr. Bertman, because
Yeah.
you have intrigued me with the discussion regarding deliberately misguiding the reader away from what you want from your main point. And so, if you've already posted your poem, do please send me, a link to it. Or if you
Sure.
haven't posted it already, do please send it to me
Spoken.
because you have intrigued me. And
Many of my
usually,
poems use this, like many of my poems attempt to misguide the reader to the point where they are completely offended, even though the poem in itself, uh, if you come to it without emotion, detached, you read it and you understand, you are, it's impossible for you to misunderstand it. But the way I word it, it makes you just go balanka.
that's exactly what intrigues me so much. So Of course, I will go and take a look into the chat, but it would be helpful for me if you pick the ones that you specifically, wrote with that specific approach and just, send me a link or send me the poem, because you have intrigued me a lot and I would love to take a look.
Yes.
Surely. You want to do that now or after?
After.
I would love to do it after, if that's okay for you,
No
because I
problemo.
do love to take my own time reading works. Plus, I do have another meeting to get to, so I would love to do that at some point. But yeah, do send me. And plus, do send me, because I remember you showed a particular interest in Hemingway, and I only shared my opinion. So do send me your own in the chat.
Very nice.
Ria,
Very
did you have a
nice.
question?
I don't think so, but I have another question from Manha. She actually also left us, but the question was, any favorite quotes or poems?
That was an hour ago by Maya.
Mine? Favorite quotes or poems for me?
Yes.
Oh, that's a good question. That's a very good question. I've got several, but honestly, yes, I've got one, but that's emotionally my favorite, but it's not, structurally or anything my favorite. And you will find it at the end of Yeats's collections. And let me see if I can find it here to put a link in the chat box right now. I think Poetry Foundation always has it.
So that's a favorite poem, not like a favorite quote. So it's a full poem, right?
Yes, it's a full poem. Oh, yes, Poetry Foundation has it. Give me a second. So it's about, well, I won't. Okay, here it is. I'm not going to kind of oversimplify it by saying it's about writer's block, because it's about so many other things. But yeah, I would mention this off the top of my head, emotionally at least. There are lots of poems that I think, I've learned about a lot, but emotionally, this is one of my favorites.
Now you can see. You can see it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I can put this in the school chat too.
Yeah, that will be great.
People would love to see. Yeah. I can even open up a post where we all share our favorite poems, so it's not just me.
Oh yeah,
Putting it
that's
out there
great.
in the world.
Yeah, but you need to mention like your favorite poem from another author, because I think maybe people can get it as something that they need to think of the best poem they ever wrote by themselves. So yeah, in this case,
Oh, okay.
interesting to know what people like to read from other people as well, from other poets.
Got it. And not our own work. Got
Okay.
it. I'll do that.
Yeah, I think it was really great call. Ria, you just joined us again. Ria, tell us something. Use the chat. Maybe you have some question for the conclusion, some last questions for Evita. Of course, it's not the last time we see Evita with us. Definitely not. But you can use this moment as well, because Evita also needs to go. I think this call is already longer than it was planned, actually. But I enjoyed that. I hope you also enjoyed it as well. And no, it's already answered. Okay, that's
Cool.
nice.
But
That's
I'm always also available via the chat, etc. If anything occurs, if you post something and I'm not seeing it for any reason, you can also just let me know there.
Yeah.
And I'll make sure to address everything.
Evita, in conclusion, any future plans, future goals for yourself, for your personal life?
Oh, well, just submitting again and again. The main goal is to, just keep that wheel turning, and ultimately, make sure that I get, some traditional publishing for the chapbook collection, and of course in terms of school, just making sure that I'm first of all, that I know what exactly are the main interests that everybody has, and I'm doing everything to collaborate in getting to those goals, all of us together.
That's great.
What do you mean by submitting? I mean, why use the word submitting exactly? I mean, is there something that I'm missing here, a particular thing that I'm missing? Like, why submission, not any other word? Yeah. I think there's something I'm missing.
Because I think, well, probably again, this is me, but I think the submission process is the threshold that can be really tricky to cross. It's time consuming.
What is
It's not as,
submission, though? That's the point. Like,
oh,
you mean like in
you,
official poetry, fancy societies and shit?
oh, no. I just meant as in literary journals, publications. And so, as you
Publications,
know,
yeah, fancy
you
stuff.
can submit your work to these publications so that they are considering it for publication. And that is something that I'm infinitely interested in, honestly. So traditional publishing is, for me, something that I'm infinitely interested in. I'm an editorial reader for a literary journal, so I think that kind of, not that I'm against self-publishing. I think everybody's got their own journey. Again, as I mentioned at the beginning of this call, the last thing that people will see from me is judgment or limitations. Don't do this, do that. I don't do that kind of thing. But for me personally, I'm infinitely passionate about traditional publishing. And so for me, the process of submission is a threshold that I always need to cross. So it's not enough to have, this poem or to have gotten enough feedback to have polished it, but I also need the time, I need the energy, the resources, and just to make sure that I'm targeting the work right. So I need to do the proper research for that. And actually, I mentioned, I think once to Ilya, that we can do a whole call on this, how to really target your work. And for me, again, as I mentioned, that is a whole process that needs to be completed again and again and again and again. And so, that's what I mean by submitting. For me, as I said, that's an important part of what I
That
do
went
as
over
a
my
writer.
head because I just don't recognize these bodies as official. I just call them fucking idiots. With all due respect, because they are,
Extreme, respectfully.
they're just interested in making money. So it doesn't matter if there is merit behind your work. What matters is that it will sell. If it will sell,
Honestly,
the land will publish.
that's an oversimplification, respectfully, of course. Yes,
Maybe.
and I've had my own fair brush ups with what you are mainly talking about are much more specifically, vanity publishers. And God knows I've had my own brushes past them. I nearly became victim to a vanity publisher once, just because I hadn't done enough research to know that they were a vanity publisher. So what you're saying about vanity publishers, that happens, right?
Yeah.
Yes, I hear you. The process isn't perfect, but honestly, the editorial team in a literary journal that's dedicated to including diverse voices, I think, using this umbrella term, money-loving people who, don't care about your work, I think using this blanket term can be very dangerous, because there are people who are getting paid very little money just to keep a literary journal running, just so that different people from all over the world can have an equal opportunity of being heard. And so, honestly, respectfully, be careful, please.
Diversity in general, and especially when it comes to the self-expression, yeah, it is bullshit with all due respect, because It's only as diverse as you allow within your box, within your selection. So comes me, too dark, too disagreeable, is just washed away. They don't even take a look. I don't even try because I know they want. It's too much for them. Besides, I disagree with publishers and all that because essentially they're just middlemen. And why need middlemen when you can perfect linguistic skills in such a way that you become a memeplex, you become an idea that is self-replicating. Your works are ideas that self-replicate and like a virus, like a meme, just take over by themselves through sheer linguistic power and just, you know?
I hear you, but it's something we have to agree to disagree on, I'm afraid.
Maybe.
Especially because we have little time, of course, to open this up. Because honestly, yes, as I said, I support self-publishing too. And honestly, if you ask the people, my students, whoever I've ever talked to regarding self-publishing about, you will never have heard me say that it's not good, that it's not a good approach. I believe everybody decides what their own personal journey is, honestly. But I also believe that it's a blanket term. It's kind of like a stereotype of, the oppressive publication. That's not necessarily true. And I have personally firsthand, and as I said, we have to agree to disagree on this one, but I have personally worked with editors who were not getting any.
Paid.
Yeah, either they were not getting paid or they were getting
Paid
Well,
well.
some people are just NPCs, but yeah, we have to disagree on that. Oh, she's frozen. That's better. She did not hear my insult.
Maybe she did, but yeah, I think she was about to say that they didn't get paid, but
I
they
couldn't
paid really.
insult directly that at the publication people. They just, background characters. Of course, they're not gonna get paid. Uh, but that, I mean, people who do not, put in the initiative to actually play the game, the capitalistic game that is. You have to put in the initiative to truly seek what you want. And if you don't seek it, then you're just simply not going to get paid. You're not going to get what you want. Hi, she disappeared. She disappeared. What do we do to delete do? Was the call supposed to go this long though?
I never set some time limits because it's like the creative hour. It's always the creative 2 hour.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was not expecting to have you on the call, and you really brought up some big topics, so it was interesting, definitely. So I I think it was great.
I'm not really interested. I'm just here to, boost the community. I'm here for you. Oh shit.
Evita, are you back?
Sorry, everyone. Yes, I'm back. I don't know why, but my computer completely got disconnected. So I just came back like this.
All right.
Good. That's actually a
Yes.
better camera though. Yeah.
Yes, and this is kind of what I was saying, to just agree to disagree on this one.
No problem.
Because I have worked firsthand with people who were not getting paid, but were showing immense dedication to my work, not even their work. So we just have to agree to disagree on this one, I'm afraid, Timur.
Aren't they still paid, even if slightly, to it's like a psychiatrist or psychologist. They're paid to care. They're paid to give a shit. Otherwise, I mean, that kind of, for me at
Yeah,
least,
but they could just
it
easily
takes
do
away the
something else.
motivation from me because I cannot see them as sincere because there's still something in it for them.
We will have to agree to disagree,
Yeah.
because even if they are getting paid, they could be doing something else and getting paid way more. But they are still here. They're dedicated and they're reading our work, And I just want to caution against these umbrella terms and the stereotypes of the oppressive publication, because that is not always what you're facing out there. More often than not, you are facing
I mean,
inclusive
yeah,
communities.
for most people, yeah, you're right. But for someone like me who would go on and say something or like give a poem that's basically perhaps anti-Semitic, misogynistic, homophobic, etc., 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 they're designed to make you think, and they don't want that, do they?
I think again, I think that is a very that is not a suitable theme of conversation for a couple of minutes
Yeah.
right at the end of
Indeed.
a session, because
Indeed.
honestly, when it comes to misogyny, homophobia, these are things that have to be treated with extreme care, and so have to be treated on a poem by poem basis to see what each poem is doing and whether it is against values that we hold. So honestly, a
Yeah.
couple of minutes at the end of a
Let's
meeting, I don't
let's
think
end that here. Yeah,
really give us enough space to talk about these things.
absolutely.
Well, maybe that's for part two.
Yeah, that's definitely something for part two. Um, yeah, Evita, thank you very much for your time.
Sure.
Great
Sorry
call.
I dropped out, but I'm glad I managed to reconnect with my phone at least.
Yes, you did great. Absolutely. Thank you for coming back, coming back to us.
Love your name, by the way.
Actually, thank you for this call. I really enjoyed, being able to, first of all, just kind of have this conversation and also kind of have some really intriguing discussions. And
Yeah.
yeah, so now we know each other way better. So yeah, it was really
Yes.
good.
Now we know each other, we can move forward and participate our future plans. So thank you very much for introducing yourself, for telling about yourself. It was great and very interesting for other people as well, and for answering all the questions. Any type of questions. We had like almost everything today, but yeah, thank you very much for doing this. And we see us way more often in the future, definitely. Yeah, we will work on that. And thanks to everyone who is still with us here to be a part of this call. And yeah, the recording is going to be posted on school. And Evita, get ready to part two. And we see us definitely very soon again. Thank you very much.